Good morning, Susan Farrag, council staff. We're here today to look at some proposed savings of approximately $3 million that the executive has sent across the street. I did want to ask if the committee could give an opportunity for both OMB to say some opening comments as well as the fire chief before we get into the packet, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to take a moment to provide some context.
Microphone?
Okay, I'm sorry. Rachel Silberman, OMB. I just wanted to provide some context about why the executive thought it was critical to bring forward recommended actions at this moment. Given the size of the FY18 deficit that the department faced and the projected deficit in 19, we are looking at potentially nearly $26 million hole in FY20, which will significantly reduce the flexibility that the county has to address budget deficits or pressures that come up in 20. I mean, especially when you consider revenue write-downs that we may be facing in the future. Again, he thought that the responsible thing to do is to come forward and bring some options for the council in terms of tools that you could use to address that issue before facing the fiscal 20 budget. The other thing that I would like to note is that all of the numbers that you're looking at in terms of fiscal 19 impacts assume a November 1st implementation date. And so, we recognize the council staff's recommendation of monitoring the situation until February and then deciding whether action is needed. And we want to stress that by February, if the council does decide that action is necessary, you're not looking at implementation of any savings until March or April, and then at that point, you really only have 1 quarter's worth of savings that could be achieved by taking any of these. So I just wanted to leave you with that context as we start in. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah. So what's your analysis of the overtime situation and the staffing levels in the department? Because I don't, I looked at the report that just came out, and thinking about this as an ongoing problem and the amount of staff we provide. And this seems to me like a self-inflicted wound. We produced a budget that was going to do this no matter what, because the budget never reflected an adequate level of staffing for the department. So if I've got vacancies I shouldn't have, or I have vacancies I can't control, like, can I use your phrase for people who, bent and broken people who are on extended, leave because of, injury or illness. That's a part of what they deal with every day, every year. It's never factored into our assessment about how many staff this department has. So I don't understand singling out this department for a problem that isn't created by, negligence or misuse of people, but is created by the underlying situation.
Right. Well, so what I would say is that there's no assumption that there was negligence or anything like that on the part of the department. We recognize that, the overtime issue has been building. It's a factor of a lot of different issues, including the context the department is working with the bargaining agreement, and then issues like the disability leave retirement list, and also operational decisions that are made in terms of how the department will handle things like training and other issues. So it has been building. We recognize that something needs to be done, but again, given the time frame that we have to take action in order to have any kind of impact on fiscal 20, these are the tools that we have at the moment.
It just feels like this problem, which is created by not staffing correctly to start with, is being laid on one department as opposed to being treated as a county issue in general. I mean, and the solution then is to reduce staffing and reduce services in fire and safety, which just seems to me counterproductive.
I also just want to stress that that these actions don't reduce the approved complement or have any impact on approved FTEs. The idea would be in the ones that involve FTEs to redeploy those folks to reduce overtime in other areas of the department. So there would not be an impact on the number of folks in the complement.
Okay. Go ahead. You want to say something? Chief?
Scott Goldstein, Fire Chief. Mr. Elrich, before I get into some open remarks, I did want to comment on your, thank you for my words, bent and broken. It's the medically influenced duty status, or MIDS. As Wade, who's here from County Stat, can attest on the addendum, Circle 7 and 8, that is a work status that's reflected in the net annual work hour analysis. So rows 4 is disability, rows 5 is sick leave, and then rows 11 on those charts, which again is circle 7 or 8 of the addendum, do reflect and account for people's off-work hours related to work-related or non-work-related duty status. So when we do a net annual work hours or the staffing factor discussion, that does take into consideration the average amount of off work hours, including those from injuries.
But when we do classes, and we try to fill every year, we look at the number of people going out and the number of people going in, and we've been trying to make sure we don't reduce the complement below the existing complement. We don't look at the number of people who aren't going to be able to perform as one of the things we need to account for. So our classes are meant to maintain your overall complement, but you have a portion of your complement, not the same people all year long, but you have a portion of your complement at any given time that isn't available. And we haven't treated that as something we need to make sure you've got staffing to cover. So you're only left with overtime.
Yeah, so for about 10 years now, or about 8 years ago, when we made a adjustment in our working with the MIDS list, our numbers were in the 70s and 80s on a weekly average. That number is now in the 40s or 50s on a weekly average, so that number is much less. Again, that number can fluctuate pretty drastically based upon weather. A bad winter, icy winter circumstance is very common for us to see spikes in that. So the attrition rate, the attrition chart is a tool and a view of where we would be on staffing to deal with retirements as well as hires. But the MIDS list and the numbers there does come into a balance as to where do you want to be on that attrition chart for 0 plus minus to the complement number. So it is a part of that equation that we consider to use. Getting into the opening act remarks, Mr. Katz, Mr. Hucker, Mr. Elrich, thank you for the opportunity to speak. As Rachel just outlined on behalf of the executive references saving action plan, last fiscal year the department was exceeding the budget by roughly 12.8, just shy of 13 million, and is forecasted to do so again this year unless some actions are undertaken. The actions outlined by the executive in his memo will are ways by which we can adjust those, and those will impact service levels. The ongoing gap that we're dealing between budget and actual expenditures is primarily driven by not being budgeted at the required level for staffing needed to provide the service levels expected of the department. Each year, we rely upon a large volume, a large amount of overtime to meet the operational staffing needs of the department. And this is evidenced by the net annual work hour analysis of that approved complement compared to the staffing required. About 11 years ago in 2007, the Council's Office of Legislative Oversight did a net annual work hour analysis for first responders as part of its base budget review for fire rescue. That study identified a factor of 4.53 to 4.79. Since the 2000 timeframe, fire rescue and OMB have been staffing new functions, new positions at the 5.0 work year. Anything that was created before that was maybe at 4.5, 4.0, and even 3.0. So the gap that we're addressing, or the gap that's identified in the current county stat report, is a legacy gap, the gaps that were created in the years prior to 2012, and specifically we went back and analyzed prior to 2007. In March of this year, I outreached with County Stat and asked them to update our net annual work hour analysis. They have been doing this for the Department of Corrections. They had created a template or a algorithm that supported that, and in conjunction with David Gotzman and Wade Highland over there, we've completed that analysis, as you see, as a part of the addendum that Susan provided. And that work hour analysis identifies that it takes 5 firefighters to fill one position 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. On circle 4 of that analysis, it outlines 179.6 positions deficient to support the station-based units and positions. So to close this gap, the department is utilizing overtime or cutting service levels. In addition to the net annual work hour analysis through county stat that I identified, the Chief Administrative Officer helped me in engaging with the Internal Audit Office and doing a level of service study, a cost of service study for fire rescue. This study was implemented and is reviewing 4 years of detailed fire rescue operating and personnel expenses to identify the baseline of costs to operate the department. This study will address many factors, both fundamental and contributing to the personnel, uniform as well as support administrative, capital expenses, facilities as well as vehicles, building maintenance, vehicle maintenance, supplies, EMS, facility, administrative, public safety, as well as our support outreach programs of community outreach, senior outreach, and car seats. There are increasing costs within these categories outlined above, and these costs are trending upward and will likely to continue for future years. I hope this study provides me opportunities to identify efficiencies and cost savings while still maintaining the service level as requested. It is anticipated that that study will be completed by the end of the calendar year and will be available to help frame a future discussion on the proper level of funding for the fire service. In past fiscal years and savings plan, the executive has submitted adjustments to operational services in Hyattstown, Hillendale, and Germantown. The Public Safety Committee, as well as the Council, has not approved those proposals in the past, and as such, Mr. Leggett did not include those specific reductions within this transmittal. I would be remiss by not sharing the previous budget reductions for Hyattstown, Hillendale, and Germantown are proposals that the executive and I believe are better choices than those that are outlined within this packet. These proposals, as identified previously, would have an annualized savings of roughly $4.9 million. Mr. Leggett understands the impacts of these proposed adjustments. Each proposed adjustment is difficult to recommend, but immediate action, as Rachel outlined, is necessary to adjust the department's expenditures closer to the approved budget level. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some opening remarks on behalf of Mr. Leggett, and welcome any questions yourself or Ms. Farag have.
If you don't have any questions at this point, I'm happy to
I've
walk
got
you through.
questions.
Okay, go ahead.
I was waiting for my colleagues. Look, I'll just start by looking at the chart on page 2, the MCFRS operating budget history. In 2015, you had an approved budget of $225 million. And in FY18, the actual budget is $227 million. How many stations have we added since then?
Since 15, no stations have been
Nothing's
added.
opened?
The last station that was open was 32 Travilla. That opened in the FY14 cycle, the end of end of calendar 13.
And you've got, what have you added any other services since then? Chase cars, other?
Correct.
Yeah.
ALS 725 chase car was added this past year. Paramedic engines staffing at Tacoma Park and Bethesda, Cedar Lane were added in the FY18, so there have been services increased in FY18 as you outlined.
And the FTEs look like they're the same between 15 and 18, 0.2 of a employee difference. Did I get that right? Right?
As
That
the
made
chart
it
shows.
1286, 1286.
Yeah, what I will say is that there have been some fairly significant adjustments to what we're budgeting for retirement in those years. So you may not be looking at a reduction in the resources available for the implementation of service. It looks like there's been about a 12 FTE increase over this period from 15 to 19. 1286 to 1298.
In 19, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I would just also like to note that this chart doesn't reflect, at least the cost overruns here don't reflect some pretty significant AMOS supplementals that the department gets every year, so you need to adjust.
But wouldn't every year have to be adjusted for them?
Yeah, yes, absolutely, but there was a year where there was two supplementals, so it just adjusts.
I handed out the email, it should be within your papers, that includes the AMOS supplemental amounts.
Okay. How much of the ambulance fees, have they stayed the same over this period of time?
Over the period of time, 15 through 18, they have incrementally gone up from about 17 to now about 20.
About
19, so 19 is where we've been for the last 2 years, and we forecast that to be about the level of maintenance and the level of continuity going forward. Susan asked a question that's later on in the packet about the abilities to increase the billing rate
Right.
and what their return would be on net revenues, and it's a minimal or limited amount of return based upon how Medicare as well as the insurance companies set their reimbursement rate.
So you're at the limit of what you can do?
It is our belief that while we could raise the bill rate from this amount to 120% of that amount, our return would be probably in the $50,000 to $100,000 of additional revenue into the county based upon the Medicare rate being the core number set for the transport level.
And are you saying that reductions in the budget between 15 and 18 are just attributable to retirement savings, $11 million?
Those have been the largest swings, is the retirement, what's budgeted for retirement. We could go back and take a closer detailed look, but, yeah.
I mean, when I'm looking at the budget that's lower than it was in 15 being approved, and given some addition in staffing and services and improvements in pay and things over time, it's kind of hard to imagine delivering the same services with less money. And increasing by 12 people for FY19 and still having a budget that's smaller than was approved in FY15. I just think you're being asked to do a lot with not enough resources, and I look at this as, inevitable, and we have not signed on for reducing services. I mean, we never charged the department and said, come back and reduce services. This ought to be treated as kind of a core service here, and it is a core service, probably one of the things that our residents count on more than anything else. Go ahead.
And I agree with much of what you've just said, but in the packet, as we get into it, you're going to see that there are savings that can be had, that Susan has found, that I'd like OMB to eventually, once you get to it, to comment on those. To me, what we're looking at in the beginning of this whole discussion is saying how, and I understand that we're calling it not a reduction in services. If you have less people doing the same job, then you are reducing services and response times. And if we're doing that, that's a huge concern, I think, to everybody. And if we can do the same savings without having to do what is being suggested from OMB, I think we'd be much better off. And that's why I think, candidly, we should get to Susan's discussion, please.
I agree.
Would you like me just to walk you through the proposed cuts at this point? On page 2, there's a list of the 4 different proposed reductions. The first one is eliminating overtime backfill of 4-person staffing during non-peak hours. That's a savings for this year of about $521,000, and it indicates 6 fewer FTEs. Nobody, I just wanted to be clear on all of these. Nobody's losing a job. They're getting deployed to handle overtime issues. There's more of a description on page 3 for eliminating the backfill of 4-person staffing. It maintains 4-person staffing during peak hours, which are 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and it also maintains 4-person staffing on most calls during non-peak hours. If overtime backfill is required to fill that 4th position, engines will operate with only 3 personnel instead. The service impact on this is that they're assuming 87% of 4-person staffing calls will be maintained during non-peak hours. They had indicated to me 5 engines will be identified to run with 3-person staffing at that time, and they haven't officially selected engines, but they will select engines that minimize service disruption. I spoke to OMB and the fire department several weeks ago, and at that time the chief indicated the ones that were most likely to be targeted would be Tacoma Park 702, Kensington Parkland 721, Germantown 729, and Bethesda 720. That leaves an additional one that has yet to be determined, and it would be helpful at this time if the chief could explicitly state these are the ones that would be impacted, and what would the 5th engine be?
So as Susan outlined, when about two and a half weeks ago when we met, we talked about these 4 places were ones that I mentioned. The cause and effect of this packet will drive that final selection of units. As listed here, Bethesda Station 20 is a place considered to have the 4th person reduced, but if the reduction of Station 20 were to occur, that unit would have to be replaced with another unit. So when looking at the 35 engine companies that we staff, some of those are integrated career and volunteer staffing, so the personnel at that station are not just for the engine, they're for multiple units within that station. The reduction of a person there would have a cascading impact to multiple units, not just the engine. Additionally, stations with special operations staffing requirements or our rural facilities where we utilize that 4th person as a primary tanker driver or the transition to assist with that rural water supply capability is a consideration. So as we look at these stations of identity and trying to identify specifically 5 to be adjusted, we're looking at a multitude of factors. It is not exactly one point or the other. So while I'm looking at proximity to emergency rooms as well as EMS and ALS volume of calls, I'm looking at places where when the impact of this cut is taken, that the 3-person paramedic engine remains in service so that the paramedic stays in the community, stays available for both my personnel as well as the residents, but a 3-person paramedic engine, as answered later in the packet, is much limited in what it can do when it now is only at 2 personnel. It is a fundamental need for them to regain their member and be able to go back before they're able to go back in service. So Tacoma Park is a facility I'm looking at. Germantown, a combination of if the ambulance adjustment is taken as listed in this packet, my selection of Station 21 in Parkland, Kensington would be a double hit, so that probably would not occur, but Station 21 would be a place that the 4th firefighter could be removed. Station 19 in Seminary Hills, Silver Spring at the Beltway and just inside the Beltway on George Avenue is a facility. I already highlighted the Bethesda, Station 20, Cedar Lane, and then potentially Station 10, Cabin John, 7 Locks, and River Road. So those are a list of 6 facilities. Some of those have ties to other reductions within this packet. A final list would be based upon, what other selections and adjustments are made.
What's the practical impact of deploying a vehicle with 3-person staffing that has a paramedic as part of the 3? What's it mean when that engine arrives on a site? What can it do? What can it do?
So a 3-person engine is going to provide the critical ALS service that it's expected. As your question was about the paramedic capability, the 3 people on the engine, the 2 people on the ambulance or the transport unit are going to be able to engage with that patient care. The loss of that fourth person or that loss of that sixth body is going to impact that crew's ability to fully engage on that critical patient care. The fourth person, or that four-member engine company, is a combination, or is the best suited for our all hazards approach. That four-person crew is about 25% more efficient on basic fire ground activities than a three-person crew. Paramedic excluded, so just we're looking at 4 personnel versus 3 personnel. That engine company, and Miss Moore in her letter outlines that 5.1 minutes was the calculated speed of accomplishing a core set of tasks. A 4-person crew could accomplish that 5.1 minutes faster than a 3-person crew, and get water on the fire as outlined in the NIST and those studies 6% faster. So it's a multitude, because our challenges in a residential fire, our challenges on a medical event, and our challenges on a high-rise fire are much different. So the impact of a 3-person paramedic engine dropping its paramedic is a 2-person unit is unable to respond to an event without additional manpower being sent. So if we left that 2-person engine company in service, they would be dispatched on a fire alarm, a medical call, car crash, any type of our incidents. We'd be now sending a 2nd unit to assist them, provide that manpower, which is why operationally we would imply the general direction of, if you've dropped your paramedic, meaning they've upgraded a patient and are taking that patient to the hospital, you follow them, you go to the hospital and retrieve your paramedic as soon as possible to enable yourself to be back in service as a 3-person unit. So it's a cascading impact.
Does it affect other units that might have to respond to?
Yeah, so as I said, if a 2-person unit is dispatched on a call, they're going to require manpower, which means you're now sending a 2nd unit.
Okay. So if you were just optimizing operations, you would not recommend this as a normal practice here? Thank you.
The second item involves night staffing on 3 ambulances: Ambulance 711 in Glen Echo, Ambulance 733 Rockville Falls Road, and Ambulance 721 Kensington Parkland. This reduction would save $892,000 this year, and it fully eliminates night staffing from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. on these ambulances. While the ambulances are eliminated at night, the reduction does not impact response times for paramedics. It would impact ambulance service instead, and that would include necessary transports to hospitals. The response times would go up for these types of calls, except for Kensington Parkland Ambulance 721. However, all 3 of these units have very low call volume, as shown on page 4, between about 2 calls and 4 calls per night. I had also asked, since this does have a high volunteer presence in this area, if executive staff had discussed these proposed reductions with the Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association, and they indicated that Kensington and Rockville volunteers indicated they cannot replace the services proposed for reductions. At the time I had spoken to the executive staff, they had not yet reached Glen Echo volunteers to see what their capacity would be to backfill service. I don't know if there's an update on that or not.
There is not an update
Okay.
on discussions with Glen Echo. As outlined by Susan, I touched base with the leadership at Rockville and Kensington to discuss was their volunteer capacity within their standby crews to move resources from Station 3 or Station 5 respectively to Station 33 or 21. Both chiefs responded to me after evaluating it with their leadership that they did not have that capacity, and as Susan outlined, I have not been able to get in touch with Glen Echo.
The third item is eliminating weekday staffing on Aerial Tower 703, downtown Rockville. This would save about $289,000 for this year, and it would take the aerial tower out of service during the weekdays. You will still have integrated career and volunteer staffing in place during the nights and weekends. Weekday aerial tower unit calls will be covered by surrounding stations with aerial units, as well as the Rockville Rescue Squad at Station 3. I had a question from a council member about call volumes. They experienced about 935 during the day last fiscal year, I believe, and 626 at night. It will reduce response times, or it will increase response times in some portions of the area from 8 minutes to 12 minutes. There are response time charts listed on circles 16 through 17. The next one is eliminating paramedic engine 720 Bethesda Cedar Lane. That could save $1.3 million. That would take the paramedic engine out of service. Much of the service area currently has response times within 6 minutes. If this engine is removed, units at other stations can help provide coverage to the entire area within 8 minutes. The area is also served by Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Squad and first responders from NIH. The executive had also listed some ideas for alternate savings. This was more to give a scope of the impact, not necessarily something that council members, committee members may want to choose, but I just wanted to point those out on pages 4 and 5. And as we discussed earlier, I did ask it whether or not the EMST fee could be increased, but because of all the negotiated reimbursement rates with insurance companies and the fact we don't balance bill and we do not bill people who are uninsured, it really would not have any substantive impact on revenues.
Can I take a second, Susan?
Sure.
One on Station 20, Bethesda Cedar Lane. If you are looking at the circle 18 through 20s, you'll note that we do not calculate, we do not show on our response time maps coverage from the federal facilities. Station 20 sits at Cedar Lane and Old Georgetown Road. Station 51, which is the NIH Fire Department, sits immediately behind them on the campus property, and then on the other side of Rockville Pike is the Walter Reed National Military Medical Facility and that fire station. You do not see a 51 or 50 on these response times maps because we do not show them in our areas of response coverage. Yes, as outlined on page 4, they do provide first responder capabilities as well as response to 911 calls within the county. They're a mutual aid partner of ours, but these maps shown through 18 through 20 only identify, the 37 MCFRS stations on there. So as these adjustments would go, those maps reflect only Montgomery County facilities.
The last part of the packet is looking at the two primary systemic cost drivers and mitigation efforts that are already underway and which could be underway. The most enduring one and most significant one is overtime, which we've discussed already a little bit here, and we've discussed at every budget work session we've had for the past several years. For FY18,
Wow. This is something to talk about.
FY18, the approved budgeted amount for overtime was $16.2 million, and the department has overspent this. I believe the correct number is $8 million. And the overtime continues to be concentrated in field operations and training. The FY19 approved budget also includes the same amount, $16.2 million for overtime. However, it's been historically under budgeted, and we've known from mid-year reports that they've spent well over 50% by the end of December in the past several years. We had requested a staffing plan that County Stat did. In this packet, it indicates it was not yet available. However, they have sent it over, and it should be in the addendum that you have. And again, the chief has discussed those 179 positions that would optimize staffing for response units with very minimal use or reliance on overtime, I should say. Of course, determining the appropriate mix of career staffing and overtime will result in a more accurate budget and potentially minimize unanticipated overtime overruns. There's no real cost savings that we can do at this time unless we added a recruit class, but again, that would take 1 or so years to realize any savings. It would be a more accurate representation of actual costs and expenditures if we put it under career staffing versus, unexpected overtime. There are two other things that I did want to point out about this, though. Disability retirement on page 6. It had taken 4 or 5 months to approve disability retirement determinations for people, and during that time they had to backfill with overtime. That increased to approximately 15 months for a period of time, and of course that made overtime costs increase. This time to process disability retirements has been greatly reduced recently, however, and it's back down to about 4 months. OMB advises that this change could reduce overtime costs by approximately $750,000 if the trend continues. The other initiative that they're looking at is looking at certain functions that are now performed solely by uniformed firefighters working overtime, and they would civilianize these functions. It's going to look at various functional assignments within the department, and point out a few of them with distribution of EMS equipment and supplies, managing the department radio and mobile data computer systems, fire apparatus, portable equipment supply and repair, and mapping and GIS interface programming at the ECC. If some of these functions can be converted to civilian positions, overtime reductions could total $300,000. This savings can be offset by additional personnel costs, so it may, on paper, the net impact may not be much, but again, it would be more accurately budgeted if we have actual positions versus doing this work with overtime. The other cost driver has been vehicle repairs. They had budgeted about $1.7 million in FY18, but their actual expenditures were closer to $4.4 million. So that was a net overrun of about $2.7 million. They do have an aging fleet, and in FY18 they had more units out of warranty. And their maintenance costs just in general are more because they have complex electrical systems and emissions mandates and that type of thing. In FY19 and FY20, they expect to receive 2 tankers, 4 brush engines, 24 engines, and 15 EMS units, and they will go into service in the fourth quarter of FY19 and then in FY20, in early FY20. At that time, they anticipate vehicle maintenance savings as the apparatus will be under warranty and the average frontline fleet age decreases. These actual savings are difficult to quantify at this point, of course, because routine maintenance parts and equipment will still be needed to service the new equipment. At this point, I'm concerned with all the proposed impacts. The chief also indicated that the impacts or the reductions that they were giving during the FY19 budget deliberations initially would be easier to implement and have less service impact, and the council did not accept those recommendations. I think if the committee wants to look at it and come back in February, as Rachel mentioned, just to observe what types of costs are continuing, the overtime is continuing, and look and see whether or not they do get these potential savings from the different initiatives that they've mentioned, we can take a look at it again in February. And yes, that will eliminate several months of the ability to save if you want to take these savings now. I'm not recommending at this time taking any of these proposed savings. If the committee feels it's necessary to take some, I think the least impactful would be the proposed off-peak ambulance service cuts for $892,000.
On the maintenance issue, do we keep data now with, say, each truck to know what we're spending on each truck to maintain it? To your point about not knowing what the impacts might be, it would be useful to know what a new truck requires in service and maintenance, normal service and maintenance versus what the older equipment is, so we could get some sense of what this infusion of equipment might impact repairs going forward.
So by stock number, the answer would be yes. It would be more effective to talk about by breed,
Yeah.
breed and age of, or general age. So with engine companies predominantly that are running about 10 years of age, they were predominantly produced in 2007 through 2009, and ladder trucks that were also in that 5 through 7 time frame with that a little over 50 pieces of apparatus that we purchased right about a decade ago. We could provide a information by breed, engines, aerials, EMS units as to cost. The nuance between 2 units of the same age, the 2 units of the same year, based upon volume and as well as non-mechanical or non-wear and tear cost. So that would be an offset. So if you listed 35 engine companies,
Right.
you would see many different spikes. But that information we can provide to Susan by breed with a average or a median cost by breed for service. As outlined, these units are used to be electrical, and now they're simplex and multiplexed electrical systems, which is a compounding factor, as these things with the 24 engine companies in specific, as we get to them being on board, they will have less maintenance costs because of some design and engineering changes than their prior units, as well as the traditional 3 and 5 year warranties for service will be in place for those periods of time, which will reduce our maintenance costs as Susan outlined.
Good. Yeah. Either one.
Thank you. Susan, thank you very much for this packet, and others as well. But in Susan's case, it really was very eye-opening to me. If you took the three savings that you have on page 7 and page 8, it's about $3,800,000, 3.7, that we would actually be getting. And I understand it's not going to be first day. It's going to be, but it's going to be past November when some of these start. I mean, the maintenance money doesn't come in until, what I think it was fourth quarter 19 and early 20. But there's certainly savings, and it certainly would not have to do with a lowering of response times or raising of response times, I guess is the right way to say that. But I guess it comes back to my question to OMB. This department is one department in Montgomery County. They deal with life safety issues. Have you looked at other savings from other areas, other departments?
What I would say is that every year, every budget year since I've started with the county, which was 5 years ago, we've gone through this exercise where we scrub all the departments for as much savings as we can possibly find. And as you all know, every department has priorities and is important to its constituency. So what I would say is that, yes, that's something we do on an annual basis, and it's something that OMB looks at as we approve actions that are requested across departments throughout the year. So absolutely, yes. And I do just want to really briefly address, in terms of the savings that are outlined in the council staff recommendations, the one that we do anticipate in 19 is the $750,000 with the disability retirements. But, the civilianization, as Susan mentioned, is likely to net out to zero when you add the cost of benefits and things with the civilian position. And again, the apparatus maintenance is likely, that savings isn't going to hit us until fiscal 20 when we're facing this cumulative hole. So, yes, we do look across departments for savings.
Well, and I appreciate that, I do. But as far as I'm concerned, we should do exactly what is being suggested by Susan, and that is wait till February, see where we are for the various savings plans, for the various savings that had the potential. And then if there's a problem in February, then we're going to have to deal with the problem in February and see then whether or not these numbers still work, or whether or not we'd have to, increase, decrease, whatever we're going to have to do. But to do this now and to increase response times, and to me, is a very dangerous thing to do. Thanks.
I think everything's been said, but just to follow up on Sydney's point, Rachel, when you're considering departments for savings, are all departments essentially the same, or do you weight some departments differently than others in terms of their core functionality for the county?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Bryant from the Office of Management and Budget. When we're looking at savings across the county, we're looking at how the departments are spending their budgets. There is currently a quarterly analysis process in place that the council receives at second quarter, but we don't wait until second quarter to actually provide information for departments to provide information to us on how they're spending their budget and whether or not they're on track to be either overspent or underspent. So as we go through those exercises, we are watching, and we have actions in place that kind of give us some barometer on where departments are ending their budget. Unfortunately, in this case, there isn't savings across any department that can cover a gap this large. And that is why the executive chose to send over a savings plan. He thought it would be fiscally prudent not to go into preparation of another budget year with a deficit this large, with all the other revenue uncertainties that could appear, which would be any write-downs of FY19 revenues, any assumptions that would be put in place for FY20, and other uncertainties like the negotiated agreements that the county is getting ready to prepare for coming up this January. So instead of waiting for all of those factors to hit, He knows that this was an issue in FY 18. It is not under control in FY 19. And instead of moving forward with preparation of a budget in FY 20 with a $25.6 million gap, this was the choice he made. Remembering that balancing the critical needs of all departments across the county is a very difficult choice, and these are choices that he's had to make in his recommended budget across all years. So with that said, he's like, what do we do? We're being fiscally prudent so that we can leave some leeway for the next administration and not just dump burdens on whoever's going to be taking this position next.
Sure. We're all concerned about the next administration, but, and I appreciate
Very
the,
much so.
the desire to
Never
look for
occurred
cost
to me.
savings and all
I didn't know he was sitting there, I'm sorry.
I appreciate the desire to look for cost savings in all departments, but just to my question, you don't see some departments as different than others? Some as need to have and some as want to have in terms of their...
Well, I mean,
Importance
across
to the
the
county.
years, we've had to come forward to the council with some savings and some reduction plans because the revenues just weren't there
I
sustaining
understand. What yeah.
things as the way they were.
Right.
I mean, so,
Did you have anything to add to the chairman's point that the staffing levels create a situation where we're having a self-inflicted revenue crisis here?
that could be very well possible.
Because the county could just hire more staff.
He
to
could
avoid
just
the
hire more
overtime.
staff, yes, that is true, he could just hire more staff. However, the choice becomes, where is the funding to hire that more staff coming from? Are you gonna take that from the police budget? Are you gonna take that from the HHS budget? It is a balancing act in which the county executive has had to make very difficult choices. And these are all critical services for all county residents across all departments. So when making those choices, he's got to have some balance, and this is where the balancing act comes in.
Okay, I think you answered my question. Just curious about disability retirement. Why did it go up to 15 months and why is it going back down to 4? I'm not sure what's involved in.
So a part of it
To
is,
get to 2.
I'm sorry, what was your last question, Mr. Hooper?
Is there any other way to, it's just, anyway.
2 months.
Finish your- Yes, I
So
don't know what's involved.
as we go through basically a 4-year period of time, we had a surge, we had an uptick. We had been running at about 7 or 8 applicants for disability retirement. In F15, F16, that went up to 10, and then 12 in F17 and 18. So the volume of applicants does impact this processing speed. There were also contributing factors between an assessment and review of the alternative position and a ruling and opine from the county attorney's office that employee retirement systems was working with the department and an executive staff. So that is the main driver that caused us to get a little bit over 12 months. And we had some folks that were long past 12 months in that process. But for F19, we're back down to less than 5 months. And that's the norm. If you're a member of our service who applies for disability retirement, once you're asked for additional information, it's the employees need to provide that requested information to employee retirement, and then the review process. So 4 to 6 is on the normal or the traditional. We're back to that now. And that will allow us to continue that process, both for the employees' opportunities and the employees' benefit to not have that drawn out so long, as well as the department to be able to transition that seat that was filled by the member who wasn't able to work to a member who is able to work and fill that with another full-body party.
Okay, thank you. Well, I agree with this approach and grateful to Susan as well for the recommended savings.
And somebody's going to have to tackle the staffing levels.
So let me just clarify, so it's
This is
3-0 not to
itself.
take any
This would be.
cuts?
3-0.
So 3-0,
Yeah, 3-0.
no
3-0.
cuts?
Yeah, we went with your suggestion.
Thank you.